Started.
Shalom, everyone. Happy Wednesday to you all. It's the Nativ night for me on TV, well, on YouTube or wherever I'm at. I don't know exactly. I'm somewhere in space. But anyway, I want to thank you for joining me. Now, hopefully, last time I gave you plenty to think about, and I didn't get very far. And for some of you, I sent this week's ideas of things that I'm going to talk about. But even if I read the 11 pages that I sent you, I still wouldn't have an hour to get through all of it. So we'll probably go as far as we can. Then we'll come back next week for part 3. Then hopefully by then I'll be able to go back to the beginning of Daniel chapter 11 and give you an understanding of the chronology of the history going all the way up to then. Right now, I want to spend my time giving you the chronology that the Jewish rabbis have not come to conclusion on. And that's the last 5 verses of Daniel chapter 11, starting at verse 40. So that's my goal, is to try to get to that point of giving you that information. But when I do, I want you to understand there's a lot of history that you have to know in order to make sense of the Bible passage itself. And since that time has already passed, it's much easier to make sense of it. If you read the chronicles of the rabbis, you'll find that most of them rely on Rashi and Rambam and Vilna Gaon and all of the rest of them, who are 200, 300, 400 years away from now. And so there's not a lot of speculation now regarding those 5 verses. In fact, they're kind of ignored, to be very honest, because it talks about something that if you're going by the rest of the chapter, you really struggle with. So I want to start there. I also want you to remember that this whole thing this chapter has really been triggered by October 7th, 2023. And I say that because I believe that's the date that ended Daniel's 70 weeks. I also think that Hamas must have been reading God's mind, because they jumped the gun. You see, Hamas was not supposed to attack. The attack wasn't supposed to come for another 3 days. And it was to include Hezbollah in the north, and it was to include Syria. And some are conjecturing that there may have been a situation where the Palestinians, who now live in Jordan, who outnumber the true Jordanians, actually would join into the fight. Plus, as you know, what's going on in the West Bank, and you know what's going on in other parts of the country, there's already uprisings among the Palestinians there. In fact, there's been bombings and all kinds of events have gone on. So God has orchestrated October 7th in a strategic way, because I believe he's established that as the end of what I call the time of the Gentiles. From now on, this is about God ministering to his people. And at the same point in time, I want you to look with me back to the book of Daniel, but I want you to go to chapter 7. They're not in my notes. I'm winging it off the top of my head. But anyway, chapter 7, book of Daniel, and I want you to look at verse number 12. Now, you remember chapter 7 deals with 4 empires. In the Jewish understanding, the first empire was Persia, the second empire was Babylon, then it was Persia, then it was Greece, and then finally it was Rome. But I want you to look at verse number 12. You see, verse number 12 says, well, actually start in verse 12. As for the rest of the beasts, that's the beasts that we've talked about, their dominion was taken away, yet an extension of life was given to them until a season and a time. Now, the problem we have everybody assumes that time automatically means a year, or a season means just what it says. But that's not been so when we go through the book of Daniel, because we're finding that seasons and time itself may actually be 7-year periods, or seasons may be 3.5-year periods. So we can't honestly say we know exactly, but we do know that the British Empire, the Persian Empire, and the Greek Empire, and the Roman Empire, for that matter, have all really lost their sway, their power, some at various different times. But the idea is that those are not the empires of today. Those are not the ones we watch so much today. We're all interested in the United States, because the United States, if you remember, was the eagle's wings that had been plucked off of the lion. And by Haym Salomon's money, contributions, the Revolutionary War, the United States became its own independent state. Right now, the United States looks like it wants to be joining back up with Britain as we go back to what the kids are looking at as a socialist republic, which never happens, but that's the direction they seem to be wanting us to go. So all these empires have come and gone. And so we're looking at new characters and new situations at this particular point in time. Now, what was it, last Thursday, there was a conversation that was had on Rod's broadcast in the morning, in which I brought up the idea of the tribulation, Daniel's 70th week, as most people call it. The time of Jacob's trouble is another word that's used for it. And I made the comment that week that we're talking about could very well have been 7 years, and could very well have been the Holocaust, in which 1/3 of all Jews across the world died. Now, they weren't all Adolf Hitler's fault. Joseph Stalin was doing the same thing in Russia, because he had become anti-Semitic. He had reached the point where it doesn't matter. And so he was eliminating. In fact, he got started when Hitler and he had agreed to have a pact between the two of them. And Hitler says, I don't like to see Jews in your parliament. And so Stalin simply removed them. Some of them he removed permanently. They no longer existed after they were asked to leave. So we're looking at a time difference, but I want you to look at it even more differently. I want you to go to your book, your Bible, and go to Jeremiah chapter 30, verse number 7. And I want to talk about that tribulation period, if that's what we want to call it. But in Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 7, now I'm going to read to you out of my art scroll, which is a little bit different than what you would have in many of the other versions. But this is how my Bible reads it. Woe, for that day is great, with none like it. And it's a time of distress for Jacob. Now, through which he shall be saved. Now, in the King James Version, it's pretty clear. It says, alas, for that day is great, so that none is like it. It is even the time of Jacob's trouble. The New King James, the American Standard, the Berean, the English Bible, the World English Bible, the NIV, all say the same thing, time of Jacob's trouble. And so we're looking at probably what Daniel was talking about from a different point of view. So as we go through this, I want to go back and remind us, go to Daniel chapter 9, and I want you to go to 24. Again, beginning with the end in mind. This is where the world will be at the end. This is not where the world is at this point in time, but I think what we're seeing happening is actually close to leading us to this place. Excuse me. In 924, he begins. In my Bible, it's called 7 septets, or 7 weeks of 7. have been decreed upon your people and upon your holy city, to terminate transgressions, to end sin, to wipe away iniquity, and to bring everlasting righteousness, to confirm the visions and the prophets, and to anoint the Holy of Holies. That's what's coming. Not any of that really has happened so far. We're just talking about where we're going. Daniel only wanted to know, when do we get to go home? What's the 70? When does the 70 years ends? And Gabriel began to talk to him about 70 weeks. So Daniel was, I would say, confused, just like I've been confused for years, trying to figure out, wait a second, that wasn't what I asked. I was talking to a friend today about a simple question I thought took us an hour and 15 minutes. And when I hung up, I wasn't any better off than I was before. I still hadn't figured out what it was that I was asking him was what he answered. But anyway, I got lots of information, things that I'm going to share with you, not tonight, but later on. Now, Jacob's time did not bring any of those ideas that we read in that verse. But I can tell you the week that could have occurred, the week when tribulation was Jacob's trouble, happened during the 69th week on Daniel's calendar. But Daniel's calendar that talks about weeks doesn't mean weeks as we understand it. I believe weeks means years of Jubilee. In other words, 49-year cycles. Interesting thing. I was reading the Book of Jubilee. I don't know if you have the Book of Jubilee or if you've even looked at the Book of Jubilee, but the Book of Jubilee deals with the idea of time, how time works. And one of the things that struck me came in the 6th chapter. It's in the verses 17 and 18 of chapter 6 in the Book of Jubilee. Should not again be a flood on the earth to destroy it all the days of the earth. For this reason, it is ordained and written on the heavenly tablets that they should celebrate the Feast of Weeks this week, month once a year, to renew the covenant every year. And this whole festival was celebrated in heaven from the day of creation until the days of Noah. 26 jubilees and 5 weeks of years. Did you hear that? So the celebration of Noah began on the 26th Jubilee, in the 26th Jubilee cycle, not on the day of the 26th, but 5 weeks into that. Now, as we're going through this, they get so specific that they tell us that it happened in the year 1309, or on the Jewish calendar, excuse me, 1659. And Noah and his sons observed it for 7 jubilees and one of the weeks till the day of Noah's death. So from the time of the flood, we had 25 jubilees. After the flood, we had another 6 jubilees. Do you want to guess when Israel came out of bondage in Egypt? I want you to turn to Genesis, and we're going to go to the 6th chapter, because he coded it in. In Genesis chapter 6, I want you to notice what frustrated God so much, that in verse number 3, Genesis 6, verse number 3, and Hashem said, my spirit shall not contend any more concerning man, since he is but flesh. His days shall be 120 years. The day Israel left Egypt was the beginning of the 50th cycle. From that day until October 7th, we have now gone through 120 Jubilee cycles. You see, the word man in there throws us off. The word man there is actually Adam. So from the creation of Adam to that point. Now that also is going to give us something, and I'm prequeling this to you so that you have time to think about it. If you read the New Testament, you hear Jesus is called Son of Man. Where did that term first get used? Actually, it was used in the book of Ezekiel. And in Ezekiel, God calls Ezekiel Son of Man. He calls him the Son of Man. Now, to give you another tidbit, go back to Ezekiel chapter 1. Aren't you glad you got a lot of pages in your Bible to go flipping through? We're going to go to the first and second verse of Ezekiel, so we're not going to go far. But I want to talk to you about time, since that seems to be my message for tonight, is time. Remember, time is like a river. It flows. And depending on where you are on the bank as the water passes you, it's like history. You watch history. You can look back at history. What you see is in front of you, you don't always see because the river bends or whatever have you. So you don't see very far. Well, Ezekiel tried to help me understand where he was standing on the bank of the water. And the water was called the river Kavar. Now, the Hebrew word for Kavar is the word already. So we're already at this place. What place are we at? Well, it happened in the 30th year, in the 4th month of the 5th of the month, as I was among the exiles by the already river. Now the heavens opened, and I saw visions of God. Now on the 5th of the month, which is the 5th year of the exile of Jehoiakim. If you know when Jehoiakim was taken off the throne and Ezekiel found himself where he's at, you will understand where in time Ezekiel was, because he's giving you a roadmap as to when he was there. Now, I'm going to leave that question in your head, because what I want you to understand is he is talking to us in jubilees. He's in the middle of a jubilee at this point in time. He's giving us an understanding. When he says the 5th year after Jehoiakim, that was the year that Jehoiakim decided he was no longer going to pay tribute to the Babylonians. Instead, he was going to build an agreement with the Egyptians. And in building that agreement with the Egyptians, he decided he would send his tax money to them and not to, well, you know how Nebuchadnezzar would react to the fact that the money wasn't coming anymore. He sent out his tax collectors. When he sent out his tax collectors, his army, they collected everything they needed, including Jehoiakim. He was eliminated. And at that point in time, we happened to be in the 25th or the 30th year of the cycle of 25, the 25th cycle since Ezekiel, or since Moses led Israel out of Egypt. A timestamp. The Bible is full of timestamps. The only problem is they use words that kind of mean that, but they don't exactly mean that. And so Jubilee cycles are often seen as years, when in actuality, they're 49-year periods. And from the beginning of time until October 7th, we had gone through 70 cycles. 70. And now we are moving into the world that's beyond what Daniel was told about. Now we have to go looking at other stories. If we want to understand Gog and Magog, we have to go to Ezekiel 38 and 39. We have to go to Zechariah 12, 13, and 14. We have to go to other places. Ezekiel talks about the temple. We have to go all the way back to Ezekiel chapter 40 through 48. We are going to have to read the Bible differently in order to pick up what's coming. But know that it's all about Israel. The rest of us are stories that are in the past. God kept the nations alive because they're not important, and the significance now turns to God's own people. We are now at that point. When that battle began, remember, our president was gung-ho, one step behind Netanyahu. But then all of a sudden, out of the woodwork, what happened? All kinds of people began to show that they were Palestinian by trade. Not really, but the streets were filled with them. In fact, there was one fight or one demonstration in New York City, which really caught my attention. You see, on one side, there were all of the Christians and there were the Jews that were raising their Israeli flags and supporting Israel. But on the other side of the street, there were Jews and Palestinians. Well, what were the Jews doing on the other side of the street? Well, you see, Chabad doesn't believe that Israel should exist until the Messiah comes. And so they're protesting, you're taking land away from the Palestinians. Stop thinking that. First off, there are no Palestinians. Palestine was created by the British after World War I. You see, that will be part of my story. Maybe I should jump ahead to give you an understanding. In World War I, in the middle of the war, the British and the French were at odds with, obviously, the Axis powers, which was Austria and Germany, and the Ottoman Empire. Well, the fight was really between French and the British trying to hold the line. At the same time, they had convinced the Tsar of Russia to join the fight. The only problem was the Tsar of Russia was run out of town. In fact, his whole family ended up in prison, and they all ended up dying in prison. And in their place rose a man named Vladimir Lenin. And you know what happened? They said, we don't want to take part in this war. And so they walked away. Now, at the same point in time, the French and the British had already convinced the United States to get involved. The only problem was the United States, they didn't have airplanes that they could fly everybody over there. In fact, they figured it would take them 6 months to a year in order to get the troops from the United States there. And so what's going on? Well, they're now fighting the Germans and the Austrians, but they're also fighting the Ottomans, which are the Turkish people. And actually, Turkey controlled all of the Middle East. Only then it was called the Far East. And you see, there was no country there. It was all part of the Ottoman Empire. No country. There was no Iraq. There was no Syria. There was no Lebanon. There was no Israel. There was no Saudi Arabia. None of that. You see, that's what they were negotiating between the French and the British. If we pull this off, let's divide up. We will call ourselves protectors. Let's divide up that area. Because you see, there's plenty of value there. Britain wanted the Israeli land. Why? It wasn't because of oil. It was a land bridge to go from Europe closely or easily over to the sea, and from there into India, where they did a lot of trading. So they were negotiating over the land, while at the same time they talked the Arabs into going to war with the Turks. You ever watch the movie Lawrence of Arabia? Lawrence of Arabia is about the story of World War I, when the British convinced the sheiks to join their side. Well, I find it fascinating because technically two different groups came. One of them's group was the Transjordan, Heshemite Kingdom of Transjordan. They called themselves Hephes. And at that time, the Hephes themselves said, we're willing to fight if you make us an independent nation. He says, well, how big do you want? He says, well, basically, we want everything in Saudi Arabia, Lower Syria. We want Lebanon. We want Israel. They weren't nations back then. We want the Edomite kingdom. We want the Moabites. We want the Ammonites. That's what we want. Well, we'll give it to you if you fight for us. And so they began the process of fighting. Well, there was another king whose name was Saud. Saud also heard about what was going to happen. He says, well, why don't you cut us in? In fact, we can cut out Transjordan. We'll cut them out because they're just Bedouins. They're not Arabs. They're Bedouins. And everybody knows that you're better off negotiating with a true Arab and not a Bedouin. And so Britain and France made another deal. So now they've given the land away to the Arabs, and they've given the land away to the Heshemites or the Bedouins. And they've also made an agreement with Israel through Weizmann, who had created for them what's called an acetone. The acetone was to cause the gunpowder to be smokeless. And he was a chemist, a good one. In fact, he helped organize and start the Hebrew University in Jerusalem with the help of Albert Einstein. Now, they agreed that they're going to do this, and they will get the land that would eventually be called Palestine, because there was no name Palestine attached to this land at that point in time. The name Palestine came from the Brits. The Brits got the land and got that name from the Romans. And the Romans didn't want Israel to be a nation, so they gave the land to the Philistines. So the original land name was Philistia. And it converted over and over again into where it's at. Now, that's what's going on in history. We know that after the war was done, the Brits got their part, the French got their part. They wanted the northern section. The Brits wanted the south, and they wanted Egypt. In fact, they went to war for Egypt, and Egypt became a part of their territory at that point in time. And so this land was now locked between the two. And oh yeah, the Saudis were given Saudi Arabia. They were given the land that was given to them. And we'll get to the text. In fact, why don't I skip to the text? Go to Daniel chapter 11, and we're going to look at one of the last verses in chapter 11. Let's see. Okay. Chapter 11, verse 41, 41. He, that's the king of the north, and I'll tell you, the king of the north is Britain at this point in time, so I can give you a clue. He, Britain, shall enter also into the beauteous land, Israel, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall be delivered out of his hand: Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. So the Bedouins, the Heshemite kingdom of Transjordan, receives those nations, those tribes. Again, Bedouins. in the minds of the Saudis. What's left off of this list is the Saudis themselves. But the Saudis are going to get their section quite quickly. But after it's all said and done, Britain and France has carved up all the land. It's done in what's called the Pike-Pinot or Sykes-Picot Treaty. Sykes-Picot. Sykes is S-Y-K-E-S. Pinot is P-I-N-O-T. The Sykes-Picot Treaty. And so all the land is divided up, and Great Britain gets to be the caretakers of Israel. That becomes very significant for this reason. Look down the page at verse 42. Verse 42 says, "And he shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape." The land of Egypt, remember, I told you Britain will invade Egypt and Egypt will become a part of Britain. Britain is the king of the north. Now we have to change our concepts of what north and south meant and means in the scriptures, because it's not going to mean always what we think it means. When it says the uppermost north, when they talk in Ezekiel, we may not be talking about Russia. Now, according to the story, 1882 to 1965, Britain controlled all of this area. Britain controls it all. In fact, it remained a part of them all the way through this period of time, all the way through 1956. Do you remember what happened in 1956, 57? A man named Abdul Nasser decided he was going to invade Israel so that the Palestinians, no, he didn't do it for the Palestinians. He did it for himself. He convinced Transjordan and he convinced Syria to join him. So those three nations invaded Israel. And that's when we had the Egyptian debacle. Because you see, intelligence had already told Israel that the invasion was about to happen. So what did Israel do? They put their planes in the air and they bombed every Egyptian plane on the ground. So they never got off the ground. So the war was canceled, technically. But there was still a war. Now, as we go through this, then we have to understand Britain is the king of the north. So look at verse 43. "But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver." Gold and silver. I want to tell you a fascinating story from a fellow that I talked to today. He works in dentistry. He creates teeth is what he does. He's actually very, very busy at this point in time in the year, because everybody wants their teeth taken care of before Christmas so that they can smile better when it comes time for picture taking time. But as we were going through it, he began to talk to me about refinement. At what temperature can gold be refined? At what temperature can gold be refined? And he said, I have to do this myself. So that's how I came to this understanding or conclusion. He says, I had to go through the process. And he says, one of the things that I had to do when I was going through this process was I had to, oops, that was me dropping something. One of the things I had to go through in making this process was to make sure I had exactly the right temperature. And then he began to tell me there were two temperatures that he could watch. One was Celsius and one was Fahrenheit. So he gave me the two temperatures at which this whole thing comes about. And I found it fascinating. One temperature is 1064. 1064. That's Celsius. And one temperature is 1948. 1948. Did anything happen in 1948? That was when Israel became independent. 1948. Well, that was interesting, but that wasn't enough. He had to make it worse because he had to tell me what 1064 Celsius was about. 1064 was another period of time. I lost it in my notes. Forgive me. I will give it to you in a couple of minutes. But anyway, I got to keep my brain going. So let's continue. 1064 is actually the Celsius, and it's the starting time of a period. And so I've got to find it. But one of the things that's over 1064 and over 1948, that whole period, when he's working with gold and he's attempting to refine it, you have to look over the pot that you're working in. And you'll know that it is pure gold. The dross has already come off when you can see your reflection in the gold. God was refining Israel, and he never took his eyes off of the nation as he's refining it. Never. You know, Israel doesn't think God is watching. God has never quit watching. In 1948, he made sure everything came together, or began to come together for them. So things began to change completely at that point in time. Now, that takes us up through a period of time. And now we got to take a jump in time, because chapter 11 covers such a wide span that there are periods in time where he just simply skips and goes to the next. So Daniel is listening to Gabriel, and Gabriel is now telling him, but tidings out of the east and out of the north shall affright him. Now remember, he's in the beauteous land. He's in Israel. So he hears about something happening in the north and something happening in the east. In the north, it was Germany. And in the east, it was Japan. We are now ready to go into World War II. Remember, the Japanese began by taking colonies along the coast of China. Then they began to take other places, Indonesia and all of the rest, looking for oil, looking for precious materials. Germany, on the other hand, was trying to get out of debt. Adolf Hitler promised them a new world. He said the thing we're going to have to get rid of are the Jews, but that's no big deal. And we'll have to reclaim all of our land, to which they began going from Austria-Hungary and all the way through, collecting all of the land that they believed belonged to them. So the tidings were coming. Now, Britain, by this time, had really lost a lot of its luster. Certainly, they had ships all over the world that they could count on. But Britain itself was really quite weak. If it wasn't for the United States, we know World War II would have turned out entirely different than what it did. Now it says in verse number 45, and he shall plant the tents of his palace between the seas and the beauteous holy mountain, and he shall come to his end there, and none shall help him. He shall come to his end there. What could have brought him to his end at that point in time? What could have brought him to his end? Bankruptcy. England was bankrupt after World War II. No money. All the money that they had been invested in ships, had been invested in everything else, but their kingdom was falling apart because, you see, everybody was becoming independent. And so they didn't have a tax base that they could depend on. And so Britain, as a major player on the stage, as a king of the North, was no longer king. Things had changed. But who is the king of the South? Well, the king of the South happened to be the Sauds. Because you see, the Saud family, they ended up with the nation of Saudi Arabia. And what was going on between the First World War and the Second World War? Oil. Oil. The Sauds were becoming wealthier and wealthier as time went on. In fact, their wealth continues. In fact, the United States is trying to help them become even wealthier because we keep wanting to buy their oil. Things are beginning to change. Not really. But the Saudis are becoming more and more. Now remember, and this is notes that's not in notes. I've mentioned this before earlier when we were talking about Daniel chapter 7. I talked about the fact that the Midrashic writings say that the Saudis will go to war, not with Israel, but with Persia. And Persia will call on their best friends to help them. And who are their best friends? North Korea. Because you see, North Korea helped establish their atomic plants. So our last few verses are going to be dealing with those kinds of things. There was a lot of tension all the way along during this whole period of time from the beginning of the 19th century or the 20th century. Israel was already trying to move back into their own land. Now, in attempting to move back into their own land, they found themselves having a lot of problems because you see, what was going on was the fact that Britain didn't want to give up what was going on. In fact, they would not even let the Jewish people come home who knew they were in trouble in Europe. They locked their borders so that the Jews couldn't get home. But thanks to going to the United States, well, wait a second, the United States wasn't helping them either. The United States was locking them out. If it wasn't for a president I don't like, who had built a monument here in Houston, Texas, for the Jewish people, Lyndon Baines Johnson, secretly moved ships full of Jews from Europe to the United States to Houston, where they have a very large Jewish community, thanks to Lyndon Baines Johnson. Thanks to Lyndon Baines. Now, he did a lot of other things, but that was the one thing that he did well. And he did it while he was a senator, undercover. But that was what was going on at that particular point in time. I can give you a whole lot more statistics and a whole lot more history, but I hope I gave you enough understanding that you can understand that the book of Daniel, and especially this 11th chapter, deals with time going from the Persian, Greek empires all the way to 1948. Now, 1948, actually, 1946 was the end of 45, 46 was the end of the war. 48 was when the nation was created. 1950, the right of return was passed by the Israeli Knesset. The right of return allowed Jews who could show their status were welcome to come home. No questions asked. We'll even help pay for your freight to get you here. All of that was going on at this very point in time. But you see, that still wasn't the end of this 69th week. 1967, a war. But that wasn't the end of it either. But it was on the 6th week of the 7-week period. 1973, Yom Kippur. On Yom Kippur, which was on October 6th, 1973, the trumpet blew and that final week began and ended on October 6th, 2023. Now, I'm hoping to make for you a map, but as you can see, the map will be quite complicated. It will be something that's going to take a while, and once I make it, or Rod makes it, or Ross makes it, or somebody makes it, not that I'm putting them on spot, but it will take some explanation, and I will give you dates and times that fits the calendar, so you will have no questions as to what's going on or how it works. I am so convinced that Daniel's 70 weeks actually are 7 times 7 times 49. Longer period of time. 45 minutes is as long as most of you can endure, and the seed of knowledge eventually wears out. So I wanted to stop and ask, anybody have a thought to add? Last week, David and Lori gave me thoughts to keep thinking about. What about this week? Anybody thought about last week or thought about what I'm just been saying? Anything? David, you're a historian. Talk to me.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how this fits in. Many people don't realize that when the Desert Fox was in North Africa, he made a huge push to go into El Alamein and to occupy Egypt. Many don't realize that at the exact same time, Stalingrad was occurring. And the intent was to link those two forces in Palestine, so they can grab the oil from the North African area and also from the Cascade Mountain Range. They even had units go all the way to the Caspian Sea, but they couldn't hold it. I just thought that was kind of interesting, because that would have spelled the death of, would have extended the war and would have made a very precarious situation for us to win. I just, while you were doing that, I was thinking about that. Also, 1064 you mentioned, isn't that when the French and the British were fighting?
Yes, they were, but that's
And,
not the event that I'm thinking of. But
oh, okay.
but it's,
Because
again, there's so many. God has used dates over and over again. He just doesn't let go of them. He keeps them going.
it would be interesting to see what those dates are on a Hebrew calendar too.
Yeah. Well, 1064, yeah, that'd be true. But again, if you read the book of Jubilees, and if you listen to Dr. Rachel Elor, who is a Jewish historian, philosopher, actually, is another one of her titles. And the book of Jubilees, you will understand that the Hebrew calendar is 200 years off. In fact, she herself refuses to be called a religious Jew, because her calendar does not match up with the calendar that they're using today. She says they're off so far. They're stuck in the dust. Let me go to Daniel chapter 12. Let's go to the end. If we're going to go to the end in mind, let's go all the way to the end. Daniel chapter 12. In Daniel chapter 12, start in verse number 9. He said, "Go, Daniel, for the matter are obscured and sealed till when? Till the time of the end. if we're at the time of the end, things should be starting to be revealed. And I think that's what we're trying to get at here. The second thing is they will be elucidated and clarified and refined by many people, and the wicked will act wickedly, and none of the wicked will understand. None of them are going to understand. Now, the word used here for understanding also is the word used for astrology. But the wise will understand. From the time of the daily offerings was removed and mute, abomination put in place, 1,290 years shall pass. Praiseworthy is he who waits and reaches 1,335 years. So as for you, go your way, you will rest, then arise for the portion of the end of the days. Okay? So he gave us two numbers to hint at. Those two numbers that he gave us was 1290, and the other one was 1335. If I go on my calendar using sabbatical years, 1335 from 1948, that's the time of the nation of Israel is created, backwards 1,335 years, where I find myself at that particular point in time happens to be the year of an abomination. That was the year the Dome of the Rock was put on Mount Zion.
735, those set?
Yeah, 1335, those years, and that
Oh,
year
okay.
happened to be
I mean,
613.
yeah.
Actually, 613 was the year that Islam was established, and it was 688 that the Dome of the Rock was there. But I'm trying to, so anyway, so 1335, that's that year. If I want to go to 1290, I might go to the other end of my timeline, and at the end of the what I want to say, the year in which Jehoiakim revolted. From there until the year of Islam being created is 1,290 years. There's a lot of numbers that I'll give you, but it's going to take me us a while to put it together. But I want you to understand, we're looking at time, first off, not from a solar calendar, the calendar of the today, and we're not looking at it from a calendar of the Jews. We're looking at what's called God's calendar. God's calendar are 30-day periods, 12 of them, and 4 days, the solstices and the equinoxes. So the calendar should actually be 364 days. And if you follow that calendar, everything seems to fall into a place. In other words, I can put a year to it, then I can put it in a box, I guess is what I'm saying. And so each of those boxes will help us to understand history, because we're now at the end of history. We're now looking back at everything that's happened since the days of Adam. By the way, somebody's created a summary. By the way, Ezekiel was called the son of Adam. Interesting. Or actually, it's called the son of man. Who was the son of Adam? Seth. When did Seth appear? 140 years after Adam, according to the book of Jubilees. Well, actually 143. At 130, he created a person. At 13, that person became a man. So the Son of Man really refers to Seth. Seth was that first man, the one should be the model for all of us. That's where our model should come from. That's why God, looking at Ezekiel, said, that's Seth. That's the Son of Man. I found that fascinating, but it doesn't mean much to you, or maybe it does. So something else in your pocket. Something else in your pocket. Right now, all of this is kind of like trivia, and I understand that. But we'll pick it all up. We'll go through chapter 12, but when we do, we'll have to go back through chapter 7, and we'll go through chapter 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 to get us there to the end. Because you see, this scroll actually is not a scroll, but it was multiple scrolls. In fact, according to some, it was actually 9 scrolls that were stitched together to make the book itself the way it is. But it was actually written, and you can understand why, because Daniel is writing, and all of a sudden, this is the 3rd year of Darius's reign, and this is the 1st year of Belshazzar's reign, and this is, each and every one of those was a different year. It's almost like he pulled a page out of his diary, and they stitched his diary together in what we call these 12 chapters. Now, there are 3 chapters that were never allowed to be entered because they did not believe that Daniel wrote them. And so they did not enter the Bel the dragon, and they did not enter some of the others. But the concept is the fact that this is a stitched together book. And these last 3 chapters were always together. There is no page break in the writing. You go from one to the other to the other. That's how it works. If you look at your Hebrew side of the Bible, anyway. Go ahead, Russ. I think you're ready to think out loud.
Well, I'm just going to comment that the last 3 chapters without a break would probably indicate that it was a single scroll.
Those 3 would have been a single scroll.
Right.
That's correct. That's correct.
Is there anything about Bar Kokhba in your things? Because he did operate the temple for 3.5 years.
Yeah,
before he was
nothing
destroyed.
that's recorded here that I can
Okay.
see. I've looked at it because I know that's a significant. I was looking for
Yeah.
Rabbi Akiva. I couldn't find him either.
Oh, okay.
I found Cleopatra, but it wasn't the Cleopatra I thought I would find. I didn't realize there were 7 Cleopatras. And the Cleopatra of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony was the last Cleopatra, and she didn't go by the name Cleopatra. She was Ptolemy.
Ptolemy. Okay.
She was Ptolemy. She was the king queen of Egypt, and she kept her throne by having affairs with Roman generals who kept her alive and everything else until Mark Antony died, and then she got snake bit. She committed suicide rather than fall into the hands of the enemy. So lots of fascinating stories in history. You just got to spend time reading them. And for the last couple of weeks, I've been percolating on these thoughts and trying to make them make sense to me. And hopefully I've made it to make a little more sense to you. And if I can get you a map, that probably would help you a great deal. But anyway,
well,
anybody
just
else?
confer with me on the map, so I can kind of understand. We'll figure a way to work that out. That's number one. But number two, you really laid out I thought very cogently. Now I think there's going to be maybe some people that is going to have a hard time following some of the arithmetic and dates and things like that. But you can always go back and listen to the podcast. Unfortunately, I didn't start the summary until far at the end. Okay. So during Q&A, so we'll get something on that. But generally, I have a summary that if you guys want to start getting the summary every week, then I'll just put that in the email that gets sent to you with the long format of the class.
Now you could send them, Rod, my 11 pages of notes that I sent you.
Absolutely, and I would probably prefer to do that then.
Yeah,
That
because
that's what I'll do.
yeah.
Just to be fair, Sharon wrote in the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sharon, I didn't see it.
I didn't either.
So did she write in secret code? Did she write in blood? Did she,
I
how
just
did she?
said Rabbi Gladstein has also talked about the 200 years. And while we're talking about that, you might want to elaborate a little bit. Are they saying we are 200 years short of where we should be, or that's okay? Go ahead.
The Jewish calendar
But
is
I
200
want
years
to know.
less than the Gregorian calendar that we're following.
I asked Rabbi Gladstein, I sent him a text or whatever, asking him, is it minus or plus? And I haven't gotten an answer yet. But they talk about this, everything you're talking about there. They discuss, especially right now with Ishmael, all kinds of stuff.
Well, again, it is not something that the rabbis are writing, because I keep looking for somebody to teach me this, especially these last 6 verses. And everybody, and Mike's got the book that I got from Art Scroll, and those last 6 verses aren't there because they're using Rashi and they're using Rambam, and they're using those Middle Ages scholars for their information. They haven't themselves, again, modern times, it's not something that they're spending their time looking at. They're not
And
digging into that
I-
whole idea.
I would like to add something, Steve. Now, obviously, only members will see this discussion, but you know what we're hoping is this gets out, and we are introducing an idea. Somebody batted around like this. We're not in this little vacuum of us 3 or 4 guys talking about this and hashing it out each week. We really do want to have people challenge it, because if these numbers are right, and if we're following the calendar, the master calendar that Hashem has created, then the dynamic of what we're getting ready to go into is far beyond anything that you can imagine. Like, we are at the age of complete redemption of the Jewish people and bringing the age of Mashiach in. I mean, we're here, and we just want somebody to challenge us. A lot of people feel it, but I think that we've nailed down the dates. Like, it's just amazing. Ross?
The question that I was throwing or thinking, considering now is, if that 200 years does come into play and it is a factor, then how will that affect the calendar that you're trying to establish at this point?
Well, I'm not sure that the 200 years has any meaning. Even if they put the 200 years into the Gregorian calendar, they're still off. It's still not going to be right.
Yes, I'm of the
Go ahead.
same. Yeah, I'm of the same opinion as well, because you're talking about past events, not
Correct.
future events. Also, one other thing to consider is that prophecy is not meant to predict the future. Prophecy is meant to reveal a manifestation of spiritual facts. So I find it tantalizing that you're proposing, and it seems to fit, that the 70 weeks are complete. That means that those judgments for missing those Jubilee years has been satisfied and the debt has been paid, so to speak. As such, the future's up to us, to a point, to some future date, whatever that is. It's either going to be, it could be come to conclusion in various ways, and one of them is forcibly. And then everything to a kind way, or according to our cooperation with the Creator. And that is a teaching that is very big within Kabbalah, and also within a lot of writings like Rashi and stuff. They do discuss that.
Yeah. Go ahead, Sharon. You want to say something?
I do, because the circle of rabbis I listen to and I learn from, they are really pulling from the Zohar now. I mean, there is a lot of things that, and they know their history, they know it better than any of us. And they are really pulling on that. And I find it kind of shocking, some of the things they're saying. And not shocking, that's not even the right word. I'm not afraid or anything. It's like just shaking. Like, it is very real, this stuff that's happening right now, and the timing. And you're talking about the timing of October 6th, and but they're really pulling all kinds of things out that some of them have never seen these things before, which is very interesting to me, because we talk, like right now, Hanukkah is coming, and it's the hidden light, and it's about bringing out that hidden light. And they're finding things that they dreamed of getting their hands on, and now all of a sudden it's coming into their hands, and they're being able to translate it now. But it just started like about, I would say, less than a year ago, but it's getting more in depth, where they're finding things from the sages, from different, like, it is unreal, and that it's pertaining to today. I mean, it's hitting the mark of what's happening right now. And I just want to add that.
12:2. Look at 12:2. Many of those who sleep in the dusty earth will awaken. These for everlasting, and these for shame, for everlasting importance. Why? The wise will shine like radiance of the firmament of the ground, and those who teach righteousness to the multitudes will shine like the stars forever and ever. In other words, there's going to come a time when there's going to be some people who are so brilliant that they're not going to make it, while other people, not as brilliant, like me and many of you, will actually find ourselves so prepared for where we're at in time that we will shine.
Mm-hmm.
We will be the rock that will settle other people down, because we know where we're at in time.
Yes.
We will know where we're at in time. So it'll be very, very interesting. Those who choose not to look into time and to look into where we're at in time are going to find themselves lost in time. So anyway, I'm glad you guys are with me.
It sure does change the whole perspective of where everybody outside of this sphere, where they're at. They're at a place of like hair pulling, end of the world, economy collapsing. You just think everything, and we're just like holding on, like the ride's here. Let's enjoy the ride because it's coming.
Yeah.
Awesome.
This is about the Jewish people.
Yes.
We're on it for the ride, but the Jewish people are the ones that this is all aimed at from now on.
Sharon,
we will enjoy the resurrection.
Yes, absolutely. Sharon, do you still have your hand up?
I just want to say something, or I have this observation, and if you guys think I'm wrong, then I'm glad this is a closed class or whatever, where nobody else hears it. But sometimes I feel, and this is just a feeling, that those of us who came out of Christianity and everything, that we were so desperate to find Hashem with love, not because of a fear of going to hell, or a fear of not knowing something, or a fear of not being part of something, but because we truly loved him. Once we found out who he was, and we wanted the truth. And I feel like there's something to that right now. I just feel like every time I hear about, we have to do because, okay, I'm going through the conversion process, but we're being told how you've got to give money and you've got to do mitzvahs and you've got to do these things, which to most of us, we were doing those things.
Mhm.
You know, we weren't doing it because we were obligated. We weren't doing them because obligation. We did it because out of our hearts, we wanted to do those things. But then, you know, I almost feel like, okay, I know there's nothing wrong with me, but it's like, maybe I need to be more serious. Maybe I don't know. I'm just a very, like all of us who came from those places, you know, we're looking for that relationship with Hashem.
Well, Sharon, I don't think you're off target at all when it comes to embodying one's relationship with Hashem as being the most important thing. And that's what drives all of us to this place. This is not a search for higher intellect. We can get that anywhere, but this is about heightening our relationship with Hashem. But my encouragement to you, beloved sister, is to not overthink it. Let Hashem guide you through this process, and it's going to be beautiful. You understand? Just
Hard.
you know,
It's hard to balance
oh, I know.
learning and keeping that relationship fresh with Hashem. Because I mean, I've had to really back off sometimes because just that intense learning and trying to remember things and everything else was taking more precedence over my prayer time or just
Right.
talking
No,
to Hashem.
I get
And
that.
it's scary. I don't want to be, I'm not an intellectual and I don't want to be.
Right.
I
No,
mean,
that's
I don't
not
want to be
ever
ignorant.
everybody is not at the same place doing the same thing. So you're all right, Sharon. You're all right. David?
Yeah, I just want to add some encouragement to Sharon. Since you spoke about the Zohar, the first volume and the second volume of Zohar, particularly the first volume of Zohar, it's called it's called the prologue. It is extremely counter Jewish culture. And what I mean by that is the Jewish culture we have now. When it speaks of Israel, it's talking about a spiritual level that you're at. And if you are at a spiritual level with Hashem, you are part of Israel. So it's not like you're excluded. What's taking place now with Daniel is now it's time for the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to get their act straight and to move towards, because it's time for redeeming the physical people of Israel now. So we will all be collected and accumulated under the spiritual Israel together. But now it's time for, like I said, I don't use the term Jewish, even though I am. I don't use it because it technically talks about only the tribe of Judah and also Simeon, since they were incorporated into Judah. So I'm an Israelite. I'm a Hebrew, however you want to put it. Since those are traditional terms and biblical terms, I can use those. But Israel is a physical entity. Sorry, is a spiritual entity that we try to connect to. That's also known as Messiah consciousness as well, something to keep in mind. So your conversion process is not about converting your soul into becoming part of Israel. You are there. And it is clear as day in the Zohar that that's what Bar Yochai was teaching. What you're doing now through your conversion process is learning to function within the Jewish community, and that's all good. And you coming in, trust me what I'm saying, encourages the Jews to take their faith more seriously. So it's a very honoring situation that you're in. So I hope that encourages you.
Now, speaking from a point of view of a teacher and a
Thank
principal,
you, David.
every one of us has a limited ability to remember. When we stop to think about how we first began to learn, when you first learned the alphabet, did you painstakingly go through A, B, C, D, E, F, G, or did you go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J? You learned it in a rhythm, in a way of learning. When you learned your phone number a while ago, now you have to know your area code. But when you first learned your phone number, how many digits did you have to learn? 7. Do you understand why 7 was important? Besides it's God's number? 7 is the most, there I go. 7 is the most new thoughts you can take into your brain in one setting. By that I mean, I gave you more than 7 things to think about. You can only grasp, and that's if you were paying attention, 7 new things at that point in time that you'll have to go back and you'll have to review and you'll have to learn again 26 times in some cases before it becomes rote and part of your thinking. When you turned 12, 13, the brain that you have went from very moldable to plastic. By that I mean, by the age of 13, whatever languages you know, you will be able to speak fluently and understandable in the country that you would have learned it in. Henry Kissinger came to the United States when he was 17 years old. His brother came to the United States when he was 11 years old. When you listen to Henry Kissinger, do you know that he came from the United States? No, he came from Germany. Because his brain had already frozen. Now he'd learned the language. He just had the accent of German that was attached to it. So when you reach 13, your brain became plastic. And so everything that you're pouring into your brain now, it's taking a little bit longer than it used to before. By the way, when you were 20 years old, you actually debarked. You went through that emotional period of time, probably between 18 and 20, when all of a sudden you were maladjusted and you were trying to figure out where you were at in the world. That's called debarking. That's what's going on. That was what was going on then. Now we have to deal with what we know. Also, may I tell you, your brain thinks at the rate of 5,000 words in a minute. Can I speak 5,000 words in a minute? No. So your brain has an opportunity to go to sleep while I'm teaching. Now, I didn't see your eyes close. I didn't see you thinking about something else. I didn't see you drifting off. But your brain had plenty of time to not pay attention to me and yet look like you're interested. So there's a lot of things going on with your brain that are very, very interesting. But it also makes it harder for you to learn. You are just unusual. I'm glad I wasn't built that way. I'm glad I didn't have to go through all that, but the rest of you probably did, and you probably have stories to tell. But I don't have any of those stories, so I will end my conversation by saying it's not unusual that you can't remember everything. So anyway, lots of luck. That's absolutely correct, David. Lots of luck. So anything else for the good of the order?
Fantastic discussion. Great class.
Glad y'all
And
could come.
we'll see you guys tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Shalom, shalom.
Shalom.
Thank
Lila
you.
Lila
Tov.
Tov.
Good night.